New York City was electric as Kash Patel, a hard-charging political firebrand, faced off against Denzel Washington in a highly anticipated post-primary debate. Everyone expected fireworks. Kash Patel, always eager for the spotlight, strutted onto the stage with a swagger, ready to dominate live TV. But Denzel Washington stood his ground, steady and composed, radiating a quiet confidence. Within seconds, Patel launched his first attack. The crowd was stunned by Denzel's cool response, but no one knew just how quickly the night would turn. America was still buzzing after Patel's unexpected victory in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. Mere hours after the results, Patel, already infamous for his hardline stances, jumped onto social media with a provocative challenge. Denzel Washington, you and your Hollywood friends are destroying this city. Debate me live if you're not too afraid of the truth. Denzel didn't waste words. Calm, direct, and unshaken, he posted, "Happy to. Let's give the people of New York some real clarity." The debate was set for the next night. Networks cleared their schedules. The entire country waited to see what would unfold in Manhattan. Patel entered like a prize fighter, eyes blazing, fists clenched. Denzel entered quietly, adjusting his mic, offering a respectful nod to the crowd. Then the countdown, 3, 2, 1. The cameras rolled live. The moderator barely finished the introduction before Patel lunged forward with his opening assault. "Denzel, you're nothing but a pampered celebrity trying to play politics. I'm here to expose your lies and end your charade tonight." The crowd gasped. Denzel didn't so much as blink. He just tilted his head, patient, almost amused, waiting out Patel's outburst like a wise teacher with an unruly student. The moderator tried to restore order, but Patel waved him off. "You parade around as a man of the people," Patel's voice climbed, "but you stand for the same elites that keep this city divided. Me, I'm here to unite, to tear down your corrupt systems and build a city that finally works for everyone." He rattled off his agenda with pride. "No more NYPD, no more prisons. No more ICE raids, no more guns, no more cash bail. I'll legalize sex work. I'll open safe drug sites. New Yorkers deserve real freedom." The cameras turned to Denzel, still silent, watching. "You're afraid of real ideas, Denzel, because those ideas would shatter the safe little world you and your Hollywood friends live in." Finally, Denzel leaned forward, his voice measured and calm. "Kash, I came here tonight to debate real solutions, not reckless fantasies. You say you'll set this city free, but what you're offering is chaos and collapse. And tonight I'm going to show New York and the world who you really are." The room froze. Denzel slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up for all to see. "This," he said, "is a leaked memo from your own campaign, outlining plans to end all cooperation with federal law enforcement and halt all prison sentences, even for violent offenders." Gasps shot through the studio. Patel's confident grin faded. "You talk about freedom," Denzel continued, "but what about a mother who wants to walk her child home from school without fear? What about the people who simply want to live their lives in safety and dignity?" He looked directly into the camera. "Kash, you're not trying to lead New York. You're trying to dismantle it, brick by brick. You want to turn this city into a lawless experiment based on foreign ideas that have no place here." Then came the line that would echo across social media. "You're not running to be mayor of New York. You're running to be the mayor of mayhem." The crowd exploded. Some stood, some were moved to tears. And as the cameras caught every reaction, Patel's bravado melted away, his face losing all color. Kash Patel tried to speak. Nothing came out. Denzel Washington turned slightly toward the audience and in a voice barely above a whisper added, "And tonight, I brought the truth with me." The atmosphere in the studio changed instantly. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Denzel's words, "You are not running to be mayor of New York. You're running to be the mayor of mayhem," still echoed through the air. Kash Patel stared ahead, lips parted, struggling to recover from the blow. His bravado was gone. Then, the ripple began. The crowd started to murmur. Some even applauded. A few journalists typed furiously on their laptops. Phone screens lit up as social media exploded. But Denzel wasn't finished. "You call me a servant," he said, his tone never rising. "At least I serve the people. You, Kash, serve something else, something darker." Patel shifted uneasily in his seat. Denzel continued, lifting another page from his folder. "Let's not forget, you once tweeted that prisons should be erased from the map, that law enforcement is a tool of oppression. Is that what you'll tell a grieving mother whose son was stabbed on the subway last week?" Suddenly, a woman in the front row broke down in tears. Her son had been killed just 2 weeks ago. In that moment, the debate became more than just words. It became painfully real. The true cost of Patel's promises was on display for everyone to see. Now Denzel had complete command of the room. He remained calm and controlled, not loud but surgical. "Kash, you claim you want to help the poor. Let's be honest with people tonight." He reached into his folder again, and the camera zoomed in. Denzel held up documents, highlighted bank records, campaign filings, and evidence of questionable donations. "Your campaign accepted over $400,000 from foreign-linked groups. You called them solidarity contributions. But do New Yorkers know that money came from shadow organizations in Uganda, Qatar, and a company flagged by the government for radical activity?" Patel suddenly stood, his mic catching a sharp intake of breath. "That's slander," he snapped. Denzel didn't flinch. "Then explain it right now. Tell these people why your campaign finances read like a criminal case file." The audience didn't cheer or boo. They just sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. Then Denzel looked straight into the camera. "New York deserves a mayor who will protect its people, not someone who wants to tear its institutions down and dance in the ashes." Patel slumped back into his chair. For the first time that night, he seemed small and exposed. The moderator, voice trembling, finally intervened. "Mr. Patel, would you like to respond?" Kash Patel leaned forward, but all confidence was gone. His voice was no longer powerful. "Denzel is twisting facts. I believe in change, real change. Yes, I oppose the NYPD, but for justice. I want freedom." He faltered. The audience was unmoved. Then a man stood up at the back of the room. "My daughter overdosed last year because of your safe injection site policy. She was 19. Silence fell. No one moved. Patel's eyes dropped to his notes. He couldn't respond. Denzel didn't say anything right away either. He turned to the grieving father with deep respect, nodded, and spoke quietly. "Sir, I'm sorry for your loss. You didn't deserve that. No family does." For the first time, viewers across America saw the truth. Denzel Washington wasn't just an actor or a public figure. He was human. He wasn't angry. He was hurting for the nation. And in that moment, the entire direction of the debate shifted. The moderator looked pale. The producers whispered frantically into their headsets. Even the TV anchors covering the debate sat frozen, speechless. This wasn't just a political confrontation anymore. It was becoming a national moment. Kash Patel cleared his throat, struggling to regain control of the narrative. "These are distractions," Patel insisted. "I'm not here to defend broken old systems. I'm here to destroy them. And yes, I said I'd abolish the NYPD. It's a corrupt relic. We don't need more prisons. We need more understanding." But his words no longer landed as before. The audience was silent. Somewhere in the back, someone quietly muttered, "Insane." Denzel Washington turned to Patel, calm and unwavering. "You call that understanding? Let me ask the people here tonight. Would you feel safe walking your children through Central Park at night under Kash's vision? No police, no bail, no rules." He paused, letting the silence speak. "We tried something like that in 2020. You all remember the crime waves, the broken windows, the blood on the sidewalks." The audience did remember, and you could feel it. Pain, fear, regret. Patel had stirred something dangerous in New Yorkers, but Denzel was awakening their memory. From the second row, a woman stood up, clutching a worn photograph to her chest. Her voice shook as she spoke. "My son Jamal was shot in the Bronx 2 years ago. His killer was out on bail under your no punishment policy, Mr. Patel." Gasps filled the air. Patel froze. "You said to abolish prisons," the woman continued, weeping. But what about justice? My boy never made it to college. He never even got to vote. Patel's face twitched with panic. I can't speak on individual cases, he stammered. Denzel rose from his seat and gently took the mother's hand. The camera caught every second, raw, unfiltered, real. Ma'am, I am so sorry. What happened to your son should have never happened. He turned to Patel, his gaze steady. This is your legacy, not hope, not progress, but pain. You hide behind slogans while mothers bury their children. Even some of Patel's supporters looked away. The truth was too hard, the grief was too real. This wasn't a debate anymore, it was a reckoning. With 15 minutes left on the clock, Denzel wasn't finished. He reached for a final document, sealed in an envelope. Let's end with the truth, he said, holding it up. This is a letter from a whistleblower inside Kash's campaign. It details plans, if he wins, to redirect city funds to community justice coalitions, several of which have ties to extremist groups flagged by the Department of Homeland Security. He handed the letter to the moderator. This isn't a conspiracy. It's verified, checked, real. Patel leapt to his feet, furious. This is a setup, fabricated garbage. But Denzel stood his ground. You say you want to run New York. I say you want to ruin it. Then came the final line, the one that would be replayed for years to come. This city survived 9/11, hurricanes, blackouts, and pandemics. But it may not survive you. The audience gasped. A few started to clap, softly at first, then louder and louder. Patel sat, face blank, arms limp, completely exposed. Denzel simply looked into the camera and said, New York, vote with your heart, but more importantly, vote with your head. The debate stage felt like a courtroom now, but it wasn't the moderators, the audience, or the media judging Kash Patel. It was reality itself. Patel tried to force a smile, but it never reached his eyes. They darted left and right, searching for help, a break, a lifeline. These are personal attacks, Patel blurted, desperate. Cheap shots. But Denzel remained still, calm and devastating. Personal, Kash, this isn't about you. This is about the city that took you in, the city you're trying to gut from the inside. He turned to the audience. He wants to dismantle law enforcement, should release criminals, flood our streets with drugs, and call it progress. Denzel Washington's voice lowered, heavy with concern. But the only thing he's building, he paused, and the silence pressed in, is a future where New Yorkers are afraid to walk out their front door. The crowd murmured. A mother in the front row held her daughter a little closer. A delivery man shook his head in disbelief. For the first time, Kash Patel looked like a man who regretted coming tonight. Denzel calmly stepped back to his podium and opened a small red folder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. This folder contains signed emails and statements from 2 former staffers in your campaign. Both left quietly after discovering you plan to reallocate NYPD emergency response funds to an overseas nonprofit based in Kala. The moderator blinked in confusion. Kala? Uganda? Denzel nodded. Yes, a group whose leaders have publicly called America a failed experiment and openly praised extremist violence. Kash Patel's face twisted with outrage. That's not real, But Denzel simply held up a printed receipt, complete with Patel's campaign logo and the foreign wire transfer details. The audience was dead silent. You wanted transparency, Kash, Denzel said, his gaze unyielding. Here it is. You betrayed the very people you claim to serve. Not for justice, but for your own agenda, one that isn't American. Patel stared at the document, then at the crowd, then at the cameras. He said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Outside, Manhattan streets were aglow with flashing phones, gasps, and tears. In bars, shops, and homes, everyone was watching. Even cab drivers had pulled over to listen. Inside the studio, Denzel took a deep breath. He sounded tired, not from debating, but from witnessing the suffering of a nation. We need change, yes, he said quietly, but not chaos. He looked into the camera, slower, softer. To every New Yorker who's afraid right now, I hear you. To every mother who's lost a son, To every store owner robbed last night. To every family struggling to feel safe again. He paused, fighting back emotion. You deserve a city that protects you, not one that experiments on you. A woman in the front row stood, then another. Applause started, soft, then honest and growing. Patel looked smaller than ever. He sat, silent and motionless, absorbing the moment. Denzel didn't gloat. He just nodded as if to say, this was never about me. In a quiet corner of the audience, an elderly man stood up. He was plainly dressed, his hands trembling slightly as he held a folded American flag to his chest. I buried my grandson last year, he said, his voice gentle but full of weight. He was walking home, just walking. A man high on fentanyl stabbed him for $5. The studio fell utterly silent. Even the cameraman froze. Kash Patel had once argued that man shouldn't have been in prison, that drugs were a health crisis, not a crime. Now real pain confronted him. Denzel didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes full of quiet sadness. The old man drew a shaky breath. But my boy's gone. Do you understand? He's gone. Patel looked stunned. He hadn't expected this. Real stories, real families, real pain. Finally, Denzel spoke. Sir, your grandson's life mattered. And I promise you, there are still leaders in this country who will fight to make sure it never happens again. The crowd's applause began quietly, then swelled. It was the kind of applause that carries tears, because, for the first time, it felt like someone in power was actually listening. Denzel turned back to the moderator. I want to share something most people don't know. He pulled a letter from his pocket. It's from a woman named Isabel. She used to support Kash Patel's campaign, Denzel read, holding the letter gently. She believed in reform until her niece, just 14, was trafficked by a gang running a so-called safe sex work site, a site endorsed by your own policy advisors, Kash. The air turned ice cold. Even Patel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Denzel read the letter slowly, each word cutting through the room. They called it liberation, but it was a nightmare. We begged for help, but the city said it was decriminalized. They wouldn't stop it. He paused and looked up. Her niece is alive, but she doesn't smile anymore. She doesn't sleep, and she doesn't believe anyone in government cares. Denzel pressed the letter to his chest. I do. And for a moment, even those who disagreed with him could feel it. This wasn't politics anymore. This was about pain, protection, and a kind of leadership that comes from the heart. Kash Patel tried to speak. His voice cracked. You're using grief as a weapon. But the crowd didn't react. They'd seen too much. Denzel didn't raise his voice or look angry. He just seemed like a man with nothing left to prove. No, Kash, you use promises to fool people. I'm just showing them the price of believing you. He stepped forward, slowly, calmly. New York is tired. It's hurting. Tonight they needed truth, not slogans. Patel slumped into his seat, defeated, his eyes unfocused and his hands trembling. He never imagined he would lose this badly, not just politically, but morally. Then Denzel did something no one expected. He turned to Kash and said quietly, you could have used your voice for good. You still can, but not like this. Not by breaking what's barely holding together. That sentence cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't an attack, it was a mirror. And Kash hated what he saw. As Patel sat in silence, wiped out by a storm he never saw coming, another voice rose from the back. A young woman, barely 20, stepped up to the microphone. Her name was Tara. My brother was murdered last year, she said, voice trembling. He was 17, full of dreams. He died because someone who should have been in jail was let go. Your no cash bail law made it possible. She looked directly at Patel. You don't know my pain, but you speak like you do. You hide behind the slogans like compassion and justice, but those words have cost us everything. Kash looked shaken. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Denzel didn't interrupt. When Tara finished, he walked slowly over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Tara, I promise you, he mattered. His story matters, and your courage tonight will not be forgotten. People began crying openly in the audience. No one was looking at Patel anymore. The room had chosen their leader, And it wasn't the man in the flashy suit with empty promises. It was the quiet fighter who listened. Across the country, something began to shift. Phones buzzed, news clips flooded social media. Twitter's trending list lit up. Mayor of Mayhem, Denzel the Voice, Kash exposed. In Queens, a diner full of retirees watched the replay of Denzel holding that letter from Isabel. In Brooklyn, parents of public school students shook their heads, realizing the danger their children would face under Patel's plans. In the Bronx, where crime had spiked, a single mom named Clarissa whispered through tears to her son, "That's the man who cares, baby. That's the one who fights for us." Back in the studio, the moderator looked unsure whether to continue. The debate had become something else, something much bigger than politics. Patel tried one last desperate move. He stood stiffly. "This isn't fair. I'm not on trial." But Denzel Washington turned to Patel, calm and unflinching. "When you ask for power over millions, you should be." With that single sentence, Kash Patel slumped back in his chair, defeated. There was nothing left to say. The final segment was approaching. The moderator prepared to close the debate, but Denzel raised his hand. He had one last message. He stepped to the center of the stage. "I want to speak to the people watching from home, not the donors, not the pundits, just the Americans." The camera zoomed in, his voice dropped, eyes brimming with emotion. "I grew up poor. I watched addiction tear through my family. I've seen good people fall, not because they didn't try, but because nobody believed in them. And I've also seen what happens when we let bad ideas and worse people take the wheel." He glanced toward Patel. "Ideas that sound good on paper, but leave blood on the sidewalks." Then came the pause, and the words that would replay across America. "This city doesn't need radicalism. It needs healing, and healing starts with truth." People rose to their feet, not just in the studio, but in living rooms, stores, and hospitals all over the city. For the first time in a long while, the people felt something real. Kash Patel just stared at the floor. He knew it was over. The moderator, voice still trembling from the waves of emotion, gave Patel a final opportunity to speak before closing. Patel stood slowly, his voice cracked. I came here to speak for the voiceless, to break the system, to free people." The audience didn't react. They just stared. "Yes, I said we should rethink prisons, but not for criminals." A woman near the front stood up. "My daughter was raped by someone your campaign defended in court. He was let out without bail. You said he needed therapy." She hasn't smiled since. Patel froze, the words collapsing in his throat. Denzel stepped in, not angry, just heartbroken. "You talk about freeing people, but all I see are the chains you've put on innocent lives." He turned to the audience. This debate wasn't a clash of ideologies. It was a test of who feels your pain, who cares. That moment shattered the last piece of Patel's facade. For the first time in his political career, he had no words left. One by one, audience members rose, not to protest, but to quietly walk out on Kash Patel. First a father of two, then a retired teacher, then a single mother holding a campaign flyer with Patel's face on it. They all moved toward the exits, some quietly crying. "He doesn't deserve our ears," a woman whispered. "Not after what we've heard." Denzel didn't gloat. He simply nodded in silence, honoring their pain. Even Patel's campaign team, recognizing the storm their candidate had entered, began to pack up. One advisor was seen frantically whispering into her phone, "We have to pull the press release. Cancel all post-debate appearances." Kash Patel stood alone, a man who had walked into the spotlight expecting to shine, only to find the light turned against him. As the stage lights dimmed, Denzel turned to Patel with a voice so soft only the microphone caught it. "It's never too late to care, but you waited too long." Outside, crowds gathered around big screens in windows, cafes, and public plazas. People had tears in their eyes, not for a political victory, but because they finally saw someone fight for them. A grandmother, watching from her apartment in Harlem, wiped her cheek and whispered, "I haven't felt this scene in 20 years." In a Staten Island precinct, off-duty cops stood together in silence, watching the replay. One of them whispered, "That's leadership. That's heart." Back in the studio, Denzel Washington faced the moderator for his closing words. This was never about titles, not mayor, not celebrity, not politician. It's about responsibility. If you want power in this country, you have to earn it, with compassion, not chaos. He looked into the camera, straight into America's soul. Protect your children, respect your laws, and never trade safety for slogans. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in tears. The debate was over, but the moment was just beginning. Backstage after the debate, Kash Patel sat alone in a dressing room. His jacket hung loose off one shoulder. His hands trembled as he scrolled through his phone, seeing headlines like, Kash Patel crushed in live debate by Denzel Washington, Denzel, the voice of reason in a city crying for help, and Mayor of Mayhem trends 30 million views in 2 hours. His staff had vanished. The same people who cheered when he attacked Denzel were nowhere to be found now. He looked into the mirror. For the first time, he didn't see a future mayor. He saw a man exposed, a man who thought he could play games with lives and lost. Meanwhile, Denzel walked quietly through the studio halls, surrounded only by 2 aides. He wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about the stories he'd heard tonight. The grieving mother, the stabbed teen, the trafficked niece. That wasn't a debate, he said quietly. That was a funeral for failed ideas. His aide asked, "Are you okay?" Denzel nodded, but behind his eyes, he wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about justice. That night, something unexpected happened. Across New York, people who had never spoken out before found their voice. A small deli in the Bronx posted a handwritten sign. "We support Denzel Washington. We want peace in our streets again." In Queens, a teacher gathered her students and led a prayer for safety, for truth, for a city that wouldn't be betrayed again. Even a group of former Patel supporters met in a community center. One stood and said, "I voted for him in the primary, but after tonight I realized I never asked the right questions. I let the slogans blind me." The videos kept spreading, clips of Denzel placing a hand on the grieving father's shoulder, reading Isabel's letter, saying, "New York may not survive you." One by one, Americans began to cry, not just from sadness, but from recognition. This wasn't fiction. This was their reality, and Denzel had put it into words they could finally believe in. The next morning, a clip went viral. It wasn't part of the debate broadcast, Someone backstage had quietly filmed it. Denzel was standing alone in a narrow hallway, hands folded, head bowed, whispering. A cleaning staffer passed by and asked softly, "Are you praying, sir?" Denzel looked up, his eyes wet. For the ones who couldn't speak last night, and for the ones who will still suffer if we fail. The staffer posted the video online. By noon, it had 18 million views. One comment read, "I haven't cried like this in years. I didn't vote for him, but Denzel Washington, he's different." In living rooms, truck stops, fire stations, people wept watching that short moment, not because it was political, but because it was human. No spin, no noise, just a man praying for others. And somewhere in a darkened room, Kash Patel watched that same video alone. And for the first time since the debate, he looked afraid. The pressure on Patel was unbearable. News anchors were asking if Kash Patel would withdraw. Local groups were distancing themselves. Community leaders, once his most vocal supporters, had gone silent. That evening, at a private press briefing, Patel was expected to make a statement. Cameras rolled, microphones waited. He stepped up, pale and exhausted, and cleared his throat. "Last night was difficult." A pause. The room tensed. "But I stand by my vision. A radical rethinking of how this city operates is still necessary." No apology, no remorse. Denzel Washington, watching from a small staff room with a few firefighters, shook his head. He had a chance, one chance to make this right, to show he had a heart, and he blew it, Denzel murmured. One of the firefighters muttered, "He doesn't care, sir. Not about us, not about the streets." That silence said more than any headline. Kash Patel could have said one word, "Sorry," and changed the story. Instead, he doubled down. In New York City, it turned its back. As Denzel walked out of the station, his phone rang. It was President Biden. You made the country proud last night, the president said. That wasn't just a win, it was a wake-up call. Denzel didn't celebrate. Mr. President, the stories we heard, they broke something in me. It's not about politics anymore. It's about survival. Biden's voice softened. Then go finish it. Show them what real leadership looks like. That call wasn't about approval. It was a passing of the torch. Back at Denzel's hotel, reporters were already waiting. Mr. Washington, what happens now? One asked. He paused. Now we hold the line. We protect the people. We make sure no one like Kash Patel ever comes this close to power again. Across the nation, viewers watching live stood and clapped in their living rooms, because it wasn't just Denzel's voice they heard anymore. It was theirs. That night, a handwritten letter arrived at Denzel's hotel room. No return address, just a folded sheet inside. He opened it. His hands trembled as he read the second paragraph. Dear Mr. Washington, you don't know me. I'm the mother of a boy who died from a fentanyl overdose last year. The policies Mr. Patel promoted gave my son his last hit. He was promised help. He got a death sentence. Last night, when you looked into the camera and said, "We failed you," I broke, because it was the first time someone in power didn't lie. Thank you. I'll never forget your words. My boy would have trusted you. So do I. Denzel folded the letter slowly and placed it in his inside coat pocket, next to Isabel's. He whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "We won't fail the next one." He didn't cry, but millions watching his quiet pain did. The sun rose over a quiet, reflective New York City, as if the whole city had paused to catch its breath. The debate had aired just 9 hours ago, and yet it had shaken the nation. In the Bronx, murals were already being painted, one of Denzel standing beside the grieving father who lost his son. In Brooklyn, candles lined the sidewalk outside a church with a sign that read, "We hear you, Denzel. Thank you for fighting for our children." News outlets were flooded with stories. Real people, single mothers, veterans, teachers, janitors, calling in to say they'd cried, that they finally felt seen. And on his way to the airport, Denzel's car paused near a group of school children. He stepped out, no press, no guards rushing, just him. "Thank you for helping us," one little girl said. "Are you going to keep protecting us?" Denzel knelt down. "Yes, sweetie, as long as I'm breathing." And those watching from home, they wept, because in that moment, America remembered what real leadership looks like. Kash Patel sat alone in his dim apartment, blinds drawn, TV off. The silence was deafening. Campaign donations dried up. Allies vanished. His name, once whispered with praise in activist circles, became a warning. Don't pull a Patel. The man who challenged Denzel with arrogance was now a national punchline. But the real loss wasn't his reputation. It was what could have been. He could have used his platform for reform, for compassion, for real help. Instead, he used it to divide, to experiment with lives he didn't understand. And Denzel, he didn't celebrate. He didn't mock. He simply moved on, carrying the weight of every letter, every broken voice, every lost life. Patel's policies nearly shattered New York. Denzel whispered in a private moment, but how many cities never got that chance? The story of Patel didn't end with fireworks. It ended with silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest justice of all. Later that week, Denzel Washington gave a brief national address, not from a stage, but from a kitchen table. No suit, just a plain shirt, just a man. He looked into the camera, no script, no cue cards. This wasn't about a debate. This was about a city crying for help. I didn't win anything, the truth did. He paused, voice cracking just a little. I want every American watching this to remember. You are not forgotten. Not by me. Not by the president. Not by the millions who still believe this country is worth saving. Then came the final line, the one that would become a poster, a hashtag, a movement. If they try to take your voice, I'll be your echo. That one sentence broke America's heart wide open. And now, dear viewers, if this story made you cry, if it made you feel seen, if it gave you hope, please do 3 things right now. Like this video to spread this story to others who need it. Comment below with your honest thoughts. We want to hear your voice. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you truth, hope, and real stories that matter. Thank you, and never forget, your voice matters.